Good. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Archizoom lectures. My name is Bea Martin. I'm a senior lecturer at the Manchester School of Architecture, where, amongst other pieces, I coordinate the MSA Collective, which is the school's cultural program. The Archizoom lectures, which meets online, invites distinguished experts, visionaries, and accomplished professionals from around the globe to share their insights and contribute to the exchange of ideas. Every lecture is set to delve into a wide range of topics, either directly or indirectly, that explore novel approaches to research-based education, learning, and professional practice. The series is driven by the ambition to showcase diverse modes and methodologies of design and design thinking, embracing the pressing urban, environmental, and social matters. And we are closing the season with a bang. I am delighted to introduce Professor Neil Leach, which will be captivating us with his talk titled Alien Intelligence, an Introduction to AI for Architects. I must say that my first introduction to Neil's work was through the readings of the Anesthetics of Architecture just over about 2 decades ago. There's a particular quote from that book that I still carry around, which is, and I quote, "In a world where the imaginary becomes the real, there is no longer a place for the real," which is, and it is now extraordinarily foreboding. Fast forward to one of his most recent books in architecture, In the Age of Artificial Intelligence, NDAD, Machine Hallucinations, Architecture, and Artificial Intelligence, tapping into new forms of reality, highlighting how AI is already being used as a powerful design tool and how AI-driven information systems will soon transform the future of buildings and cities. Neil Leach is an architect and a professor from the UK. He currently directs the Doctor of Design program at FIU, and has also taught at the Architectural Association, Harvard GSD, Columbia, Cornell, IC, and SciArc. He is the founder of Digital Futures, an online educational platform that operates in 10 languages, a former researcher for NASA, where he developed 3D printing technologies for the Moon and Mars, and a member of the Academia Europaea, Europe's leading academy, with over 50 Nobel laureates. He has published over 40 books on architectural theory and digital design, translated in 8 different languages. He is currently working on artificial intelligence. His most recent books include Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, an Introduction to AI for Architects, and Machine Hallucinations, Architecture and AI. And now Interactive Design Toward a Responsive Environment from Basil Berghauser. Neil, the screen is all yours. Thank you so much.
Hi, Bea. Thanks for inviting me. I just want to say that Digital Futures has a lot of, if I forget to say this in future, later on, has a lot of online tutorials about how you use these tools. If you just go to digitalfutures.international, you will get a link to our YouTube channel and so on. And I'm also posting my stuff on Instagram, neilleach.14. Everybody's posting their stuff there. So you want to see what's going on, just check that out. So today I want to, hopefully I'll kind of stir up your Monday lunchtime. This is going to be a little bit of a roller coaster thing, because I want to show both the positive and then I would say that the slightly terrifying side of AI. And towards the end, hopefully you'll realize what I'm talking about. I want to introduce the term that I've become increasingly fond of in terms of AI, alien intelligence, and I'll explain why I think this is so relevant. So just to say briefly, this is the end of a tour. I've been going around the world in person, actually. So I was at the Bartlett in person, whenever it was, last Thursday or something like that. No, Thursday before last. And what's been consistent has been the temperature. It's been 27 degrees. The only thing is, in some places like Warsaw, it's 27 degrees Fahrenheit, and in some places, like today here in Miami Beach, it's going to be about 27 centigrade. So I hope you're not too cold there in Manchester. So let me just start by And I'm just showing the kind of stuff that I generate on Midjourney. I'm sure you're all doing similar kind of stuff, but put at the background, just offer us some kind of some brief reflections. I think if you ask most people what AI is, most architects what AI is, they'll probably think it's Midjourney or DALL-E or ChatGPT. And these are just the applications of AI. And what I want to do today is to delve a bit deeper into the GPT behind the ChatGPT to really highlight what other people outside the realm of architecture are talking about and why they're so alarmed. That's the scary bit. And let me just simply say that when I first started working on AI, I guess 2017, 16, 17, and I was writing my first book in 2019. I spent the summer in Shanghai working on it, and at the very, very final day, I thought I feel kind of compromised because I'm dealing with something that is both amazing but also terrifying, and I felt a little bit like Elon Musk, who is, of course, using AI in all his companies, Tesla, Neuralink, SpaceX, and so on. At the same time, warning us about the dangers of AI. And so I then went back to my publisher and persuaded them to actually split the book into two books. So one is the one with the white cover, which has been published, and the second edition is going to come out soon. In fact, I have to deliver the manuscript on January the 8th, which is about the positive side of AI, how amazing AI is. And then there's another one, the kind of Black Mirror episode one, which is the black cover one, like the devil. And that is something that I planned to push back until I'd written a few more positive books about AI, but it seems somehow the future is upon us sooner than we thought. So I'm probably going to have to start. Well, I have written some things about the dark side of AI, and I think probably I'll have to start on that book fairly soon. But just to be clear, there's nothing either good or bad about AI. It's just a tool. I mean, it's like and like any tool, it's a question of who uses it and for what. So I could take a kitchen knife and I could be cutting up my vegetables with it, or I could murder you with a kitchen knife. But don't blame the kitchen knife. In fact, I don't think any kitchen knife has been convicted of a crime so far. It's simply a tool and really depends on who uses it and for what. And as with anything, AI in the wrong hands could be pretty terrifying. And there's nothing that we can do to stop it. If we can't stop Putin invading Ukraine, we certainly can't stop him using AI-based slaughter bots and things in the war there. I kind of think he siphoned off the money for AI research for his own personal gains, and we could be thankful because we haven't really seen AI in that war. But anyway, so there's nothing intrinsically good or bad about AI, but it is absolutely terrifying. And I kind of take the view, if you think about the yin yang sign you get in the Korean flag, where part of it's white and part of it's black, but in the black side there's a white circle, and in the black side there's a white circle. In other words, it's dialectical; they feed into one another. And to my mind, the point about AI, what is so incredible about AI, is really the same thing as what is so terrifying about AI. It is simply astonishingly capable. And every day I get more and more terrified by what I'm reading in terms of what's going on above us, as it were, where the experts are working on this thing. This is just simply, I'm just showing you some images that I've been generating on my world tour. This comes from Warsaw, where it was snowing, and then I moved to Montevideo, where it was very Punta del Este, where it was very via London, where it's very nice. So I'm going to give you a shorter version of some of the stuff I've been talking about in the last few weeks. I'm not going to go fully into the real reason why we should be terrified about AI, why it's going to take all our jobs away, or some of our jobs away, or many of our, I don't know what. Maybe we can discuss that in the questions, but I just want to simply introduce what this is about, because people all use the term, but really not many people know exactly what AI means, and then show how it's developed and how it eventually came into the domain of architecture in terms of these diffusion platforms, diffusion models, DALL-E, Midjourney. But to my mind, these are just simply the tip of the iceberg. They're just, in a way, superficial. And what's to come is really what is going to be astonishing. So, okay, so the three parts today: what is AI? A brief history of AI, and AI and emerging capabilities. I've got a house in Cambridge that I bought from Stephen Hawking, who wrote the book, A Brief History of Time. So I like the idea of a brief history of AI. And AI and emerging capabilities, well, I'll explain what I mean by that. That is the terrifying side of it, I would say. So what is AI? Curiously, actually, the UK has been central to a lot of these debates. And some of the leading figures in AI come from the UK. Indeed, Manchester. Alan Turing, of course, held an academic appointment in Manchester Victorian University, I think it was called in those days. And Margaret Bowden, who's been teaching at the University of Sussex, now retired, is one of the leading authorities in terms of cognitive science, and she wrote about AI, very good book that's a bit out of date. And of all the definitions, I mean, AI can be many things. It can be a box of tools, it can be a disciplinary area of research, and so on. But I like this definition. In particular, research in AI seeks to make computers do the sorts of things that minds can do, mainly because it connects AI with the mind. And neural networks are really what we're talking about now in terms of AI, and I explain why they've become so popular and why they're so effective. But there are two, so it makes this comparison, which I think is important, but there are two problems with this particular comment. One is the fact that that AI can clearly do much more than we can already. I mean, those of you, so for example, ChatGPT apparently knows 10,000 times more than any of us. And by 2030, AI will know 1 billion times more than human beings. It's going to just simply overshadow us. We're going to be left behind. That's pretty clear. Secondly, the question is whether they really need to do the things that minds can do. Hold on a second. Sorry, let me just say that this is just a match. Since Manchester's a football town, this is when I became alert to AI. Was the day after it was to ChatGPT. The day after it was launched, there was the quarterfinal of the World Cup, and it was Croatia versus Brazil, and one of my colleagues from Digital Futures, Angelica Poncio, who's really up to date on all these tools, was incensed, because she's from Brazil, was incensed that this guy, Neymar, didn't take a penalty. And he was number 5 on the list. And she went to ChatGPT and said, well, who should have taken the first penalty? And they said, the best player. So I suddenly thought, holy shit, this thing can tell you anything. You know, you could be an architect and asking it what materials to specify for a wall. And I thought, even a non-architect. So all of a sudden, I think I got a glimpse that it was going to be pretty amazing. Anyway, the second aspect about why maybe Margaret Bowden's prediction was wrong is that maybe AI doesn't need to do all the things that the mind can do. Here you've got the two neural networks, the neural networks on the left of the brain, and the neural networks the artificial neural networks of AI on the right-hand side. And it's important to point out that they are very different. The artificial neural networks is loosely modeled, inspired by the brain, but it's very different. And the problem comes when you start using the same terms. So these circular things are called neurons, and these are synapses, and then the flow of information from left to right is governed by the weights on the synapses that can be readjusted by a process called backpropagation. But the point is that there's a real danger of anthropomorphizing this territory, anthropomorphizing the term intelligence, anthropomorphizing the term learning, neurons, synapses, and so on. And this is part of the reason why I like the term alien intelligence, to point out that we're talking about something fundamentally other. It does not have consciousness. Does it need consciousness? I don't think so. My view is that, frankly, if a machine does what it's meant to do, if my toaster toasts bread, I don't care if it's conscious or not. And anyway, there's a long discussion there, but I won't go into it. I don't think it needs to be conscious as long as it's effective in what it does. A few years ago, before ChatGPT, if you were to ask people what they meant by what they thought about AI, they would think of Sophia, the humanoid robot. In my research, I found out that people in the world of AI are apoplectic about Sophia. They think Sophia is a complete sham, a complete fraud. Pretty basic, frankly, in terms of AI. And that's really not what AI is about. If you want to know what AI is about, don't think humanoid robots. Think algorithms. Think code, think programming, think software. AI is essentially software. It's very sophisticated software, but it is software nonetheless. So in the office of the future, you are going to be surrounded by AI, but you're not going to be surrounded by humanoid robots. In fact, you are already surrounded by AI. And I think people now know this, but literally a few months ago, people were unaware that AI is everywhere, especially on our phones. AI is what filters out our spam. It's what translates in WeChat. It's what identifies our friends on Facebook. It's what selects music on Spotify. It's what translates and so on. It allows us to order Uber. It is everywhere. But the point is, because it's software, it's effectively invisible. It's not a material. It's immaterial in that sense. And one of the comments I made, which I'm quite happy with, in my book, that came out 2020 December, it is as that 2021. Sorry, it is as though the Earth has been invaded by an invisible, super intelligent alien species. And I put that term alien in there, and I think it's become very clear that's quite an interesting term to deal with. So a brief history of AI. Alan Turing, okay, he had a post at Manchester. I think his first academic post came out of Cambridge. He was the first person to conceptualize the possibility of computing, associating computing with intelligence. Alan Turing tragically died in 1954, we think from suicide, and we think as a result of being disgraced by being convicted of homosexuality, or lewd acts as it was called in those days. And tragically, he died early. And you just think, well, what this genius, this polymath, what he could have contributed would have been totally astonishing. So he died in 1954, but the term itself was not invented till 1956, when a group of all the kind of smartest and brightest young men in the States at the time got together at Dartmouth College to hold a workshop where they proposed to solve all the problems of AI in the space of 2 years. Here is Claude Shannon, one of the leading figures in the field, Marvin Minsky, the now disgraced Marvin Minsky of MIT Media Lab. In fact, they failed to do anything. There was a lot of hype about what AI could do, and it failed to deliver. Famously, of course, it was launched during the Cold War, and one of the purposes they wanted was to translate the Soviets, to translate Russian. And it was really bad at that. There were a lot of jokes around at the time. They tried to translate out of sight is out of mind, and they got an invisible lunatic. So these things were not working very well. And despite the hype, it really failed to deliver. In fact, in 2006, when the survivors got together, and here they are, to kind of commemorate the 50th anniversary, they said, well, we haven't achieved very much in the first 50 years, and we're probably not going to achieve very much in the next 50 years. Just to say, this is Marvin Minsky again. This is John McCarthy, who's from Ireland, who was the person who coined the term AI. He wasn't very happy with it, but he had to call it something. And they wanted to distinguish it from other research going on, especially in the world of cybernetics. So they coined this neologism. But it's not a great term. First of all, AI is not artificial. It's synthetic, perhaps, not artificial. And the term intelligence, as I mentioned, just invites you to anthropomorphize it, to think in terms of human intelligence. And it is something radically other, in my opinion. But this is the guy who really transformed the world of AI. He's a Brit, Geoffrey Hinton. He comes from a very distinguished family. His great-great-grandfather was George Boole of Boolean geometry fame, who was kind of also, I think, a philosopher, you could say. And Hinton himself is an absolute genius. He actually studied architecture for 2 days at the University of Cambridge, which I found out when I emailed him. And he'd spent the summer working in an architectural office, and he decided that architecture was not for him. And I think those first 2 days in Cambridge were working out how he could transfer from architecture to another discipline. But anyway, he moved into natural sciences. Then he went to the University of Edinburgh to do a PhD, and eventually he moved across to North America. He didn't want to work at MIT because it's funded by the military, so he went up to Canada, and Canada has become one of the big centers, Toronto, of research because of him. And the thing about Hinton is he was convinced that the way forward was to model AI on the brain. And that had been an approach that had fallen out of favor in the first 50 years. In fact, Minsky had co-authored a book trashing neural networks and saying they are going nowhere. They are going nowhere. But he was convinced, and he persisted. to the point that, it was difficult for him. He had to scrub every reference to neural networks in any paper that he published to get it published. But he persisted, and eventually neural networks began to work, and they began to work like a dream, largely because of certain developments. I mean, the discovery that you could use discovery of GPUs in the first place, and then the way they could use to enhance your computational power. The main factor that allowed these things to work really was the vastly improved computing power and the really far and much faster computers, along with the better algorithms. That was the main reason. But there are other contributing factors that suddenly made these neural networks work and work like a dream. So what we have now is what's called deep learning. Deep refers to the number of layers, the number of hidden layers in a neural network. And deep learning is everything now is deep learning. ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E, all these things are that branch of deep learning. So they came about roughly, or the deep learning revolution began around 2006. GPUs were invented in 1999. 2006, they began to realize these things began to work. And that's roughly when things began to take off. And now, if you're talking about AI, you're really talking about deep learning. So, but think of these like, in a way, like they're kind of Russian dolls nested inside each other. Deep learning is part of machine learning that itself is part of AI. But so you use the term AI, but the difference between the first kind of AI they developed and what happens now is even more vast than the first ever car and a kind of Tesla self-driving car. It's enormous difference. It is nothing comparable. It is absolutely completely different. So in terms, I want to move now straight into the domain of the visual, as it were, because there's lots else going on. But I want to relate this down to architecture. And the wake-up call in some senses regarding neural networks was in 2012, when there was a competition to recognize images, facial image recognition, which is something we take for granted now. We've all got facial recognition on our phones. But in 2012, it was something that was very, very new and really not doing that well until Geoffrey Hinton came along and entered this competition with his team from Toronto, and they wiped the floor. They showed that neural networks could absolutely do this much better than anyone else. So you start on the left with an image of the bird, you take the pixels of the bird, you process the information through these hidden layers, of which there can be up to 5,000, hence the deep learning. And eventually it kind of concludes that it's going to be a bird. I should say that one of the inventions that Geoffrey Hinton's responsible for was this notion of back propagation, whereby the weights are readjusted so you get closer to the answer. You're never 100% convinced. It's normally 99% convinced it's a bird, but it comes closer to it. And of course, the brain does something similar. Okay, so let me just go back a second. That was fine. Okay, so you recognize images, but the holy grail for the world of computer science was not to recognize an image, but to generate an image. And that was the next step. And they began to realize, which is kind of interesting in a way, that if you invert the network, in other words, if you reverse the flow, instead of going from left to right, you go from right to left, you can hallucinate or synthesize, as they say in the industry, synthesize an image, generate an image of a bird. And that led to the first technique that became quite popular at the time called deep dream, where you get this totally trippy image. And in fact, Anil Seth of the University of Sussex is actually analyzing how you could see this trippiness and connect it to the use of certain substances that you probably aren't allowed to use in Manchester. But anyway, so there is a trippy image that comes out, and you can see this is a neural network that is trained on, looks like serpents or something, on dogs, and it looks like an oil lamp. And it produces this image, but it's all over the place. It's pose invariant, as they say, because some of the information about where these things go has been lost in the process. So this is what happens. From a kind of theoretical perspective, what is interesting about this is it suggests that the process of interpretation or theory or criticism is the opposite of design. Design is going from right to left, from the word to the image. and criticism is going from the image to the term. So, and that probably explains why most designers are not theorists, and most theorists are not designers. But the real breakthrough came with this guy, Ian Goodfellow, who was in a pub in, I think, Montreal, and was talking about these things with his friends, and suddenly realized, and he went back home and started writing up this paper about this new idea he had, which is that called generative adversarial networks, or GANs, as they're referred to. And a GAN is based on two competing neural networks, hence adversarial, generative adversarial networks. One is a generator and one is a discriminator. And what the generator does is it takes random noise and it produces images based on that random noise that the discriminator judges against a training set and decides whether or not it's convinced by it. Is it good enough? Think of this maybe like say an art forger producing a fake Van Gogh, then an art critic deciding whether or not it is a fake or real one. But the point being that the discriminator trains the generator to improve its act. And this again begins to suggest a kind of an analogy with how we operate as architects, in a sense that you have to get some critical feedback to improve your design. At the same time, if you're a discriminator or a kind of theorist, shall we say, you need to be inspired by the generator. If you think about people like Rainer Banham, how their theory is so enlightened, it's partly because they were exposed to the kind of creativity of artists and architects and so on. So anyway, this was a model that worked much better, and all of a sudden, you got this much higher resolution set of images. This is from a website called This Person Does Not Exist, where every time you refresh your browser, you will get another image of a fake person. Of course, this points towards the danger of deep fakes in terms of AI. But the point is it's much better, and it produces something that is extraordinarily, significantly better than the deep dream. It is hard work doing these things. You've got to know, you've got to be computationally advanced. You've got to spend days, weeks training the neural network, gathering your data, inputting it, training it, and so on. And the resolution is not that great. But this was the start. This began to suggest a kind of way forward. In 2019, it was this is only 4 years ago, right? In 2019, I teamed up with Zaha Hadid Architects and with Refik Anadol, who's now a rock star in the world of media art, and with Google. Google was going to sponsor this, and we were proposing to curate the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And what was significant is that we didn't even get shortlisted, and there wasn't exactly a shortlist. There were 9 on the shortlist, and we didn't get anywhere. It was a dream team, absolutely dream team. Anyway, never mind. Refik Anadol basically went ahead and did what we were proposing to do, in other words, to hallucinate not faces, but buildings. So he took all the images he could get of the work of Zaha Hadid Architects, uploaded onto his computer to this data, and used his own version of style GANs to hallucinate an image. In other words, what you could do, even though Zaha is no longer with us, sadly, you could still produce something that in some senses looks as though it was designed by Zaha Hadid. And there it is. This was the first ever GAN generated design, in my opinion, and that was the image we used for the cover of what was the first book about AI and architecture, mainstream book in the English language. Now, there had been a book before in Chinese by Wan Yu He, who's someone I'll mention later. She's one of my doctoral candidates, and she's the world leader in the field, but this is the first one in English. And after that, there are a series of other GANs, versions of GANs developing. There's a whole zoo of GANs, and this one is cycle GANs. This is the work of, basically the person behind this is Daniel Bolajan, who is the real genius in terms of AI and architecture from a technical perspective. He's really very, very talented, and he was behind the Koop Himmelblau project, Deep Himmelblau, that won a series of awards in 2021, and that was very much the state of the art, what we had in 2021. Now, this is a different version. This is a cycle GAN, which is taking cycle GANs use 2 unpaired data sets. So they're different to GANs, which just basically has one finite data set, which is therefore all you can do is interpolate or average some from what the data you've got. Whereas a cycle GANs, effectively you can breed off different ones. This is the work of the Office of 1,000-odd projects uploaded, bred against geological formations. But you could do, let's say, the work of Zaha and orchids or whatever, which means you can extrapolate. In other words, you can produce things that don't exist and go way beyond that. So anyway, 2021, this was really the state of the art, the best we had. Won a series of awards, a Digital Futures Award, and Acadia. Wolf Pricks got a Acadia Award, and we chose it for the front cover of what was the third book, I think, of AI and Architecture, Machine Hallucinations, which was an issue of AD that came out in, I think, May of 2022. Only a year ago, but it's completely out of date. It's completely out of date. And the reason why it's out of date is this, that we suddenly did, we developed another technique, or they developed another technique that was radically different to the generative adversarial network, radically different. Importantly, it didn't require you to be an expert in computation. It didn't require weeks to upload and train your neural net data and train your neural network, and it produced images with a resolution much better. And these are called diffusion models. And there had been one before, DALL-E 1, that wasn't released to the public, and DALL-E 2 wasn't released until the second half of last year. But DALL-E 2 was a complete revolution in some senses, because it's based on a massive pre-trained generic model. And secondly, you can do this, so you don't have to train it yourself, and you can generate images, as you know, in 3 seconds or so, which is very significant. And you don't have to know anything about rendering or whatever. You can just, it'll do it for you with much greater resolution. And importantly, also, it depends on you going from text to image. We become prompt engineers. That's not to say that writing a prompt is a kind of exacting science. I won't go into that now, but it's kind of alchemy. Getting a prompt right is very difficult for different reasons. But anyway, it's based on text. And what happened is that, you can write a text like an astronaut and a horse, and it will generate an image. Now, this is what's so important about this particular example, is that it shows that AI does not copy. AI does not copy. There are people like Mario Carpo who still think that it copies. It doesn't copy. It doesn't copy at all. I actually did an exercise, maybe 5,000, 10,000, I don't know how many images I generated based on Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion. I never got at any point anything that was exactly the same as or anywhere near really the Barcelona Pavilion. It gave me a kind of range of shape grammars and different things, but never the thing itself. Human beings copy. I mean, if I don't know, someone's wearing a pair of Nike sneakers and you kind of buy the same thing, or tunes and songs, they begin to spread by people copying them and so on, catchphrases and fashion and God knows what else. Human beings copy. We don't copy very well, but we copy. But AI does not copy. Anyway, this really was kind of a revolution, but it wasn't available to the rest of the public. And I gave a lecture at the Architectural Association in May of last year, which is really quite recent, 2022. And I was saying, when are architects going to wake up to this? When are they going to wake up to the fact that this is an astonishing tool that can do incredible things? And I didn't realize at the time, but anyway, Patrick Schumacher, who was in the audience, had said we already have woken up. We're already doing these things. And I didn't know, but what had happened basically is Refik Anadol had been given access to DALL-E 2 before it had been made public, and had been collaborating with Zahidid architects and producing this kind of thing, which is clearly way superior to the GAN generated images, the style GAN generated image that he first generated. And even though it is two-dimensional, all these images are two-dimensional. They have a sense of three-dimensionality, and certainly a sense of materiality. This was really a revelation, and the rest, as it were, is history, as you all know. Now, let me just say, what I think is happening here is, even though it's not a GAN, okay, this is a model of the GAN and how a GAN operates. Diffusion model operates in a very different way. It's based on the Markov chain that generates Gaussian noise that disrupts an image, and the image repairs itself, and in that process produces something new. So it's a very, very, very different process. But I think what's happening, this model, which is kind of like it's very suggestive of what's happening. I think that architects, human beings in general, are very good discriminators. You can go and order a cocktail as a bar, like I did last night in Miami Beach, and immediately you can taste it. So, oh, I like that, or not like it, or you can go to duty free and buy some perfume, sniff some perfume. Immediately you can tell if you like a perfume. Or in fact, you can tell if you like a design, an image, very, very quickly. I think human beings are incredibly good discriminators, but I don't think we're very good at being a generator. We like to think we're very creative, but I think we've got a very limited imagination. And what's happening basically with these diffusion models, it's giving us other alternatives that we would never have thought about. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? So it becomes a kind of prosthesis to the imagination, a prosthesis to the imagination, and it enhances our capacity in terms of design itself. But let me just simply say, I think that that these are just images, and that's superficial. There is something very significant, I want to say, about these diffusion models, and I'll mention that shortly. But these are just images, and really architecture is way more than that. It's about processes, about performance, and so on. And we are going to see in the future, we're already seeing, in fact, this is infrared, which is one of my doctoral candidates who was working on it, Theodoros Galanis. And this is kind of looking at environmental control systems and so on. We also have these are kind of primitive in some way, but topological optimization systems such as Amoeba, developed by Mike Shih of RMIT, which can morphogenetically generate structurally efficient forms. So this is really, I think, in a sense, what will be incorporated soon into the future. There are a number of companies working on this. I think SpaceMaker was acquired by Autodesk recently for 240 million. I don't think they're very good, frankly. They're now called Forma. I don't think Autodesk is very good. I once asked one of my colleagues who was working at Autodesk, what is Autodesk doing in terms of innovation in AI? And he said, Autodesk innovation? No. Autodesk acquires, it doesn't innovate. So they acquired SpaceMaker, but I think it's a bit of a dud. And the real person, I'm convinced, is this person. You need to watch LookX, XCool, Wan Yu He. She's one of the candidates in the Doctor of Design program here at Florida International University. She is amazing. She's absolutely amazing. She used to work for Rem Koolhaas for OMA for 7 years, and she called her firm XCool, Koolhaas. Now, recently, in the last year, she's opened up the Western version of this, which is registered in the States in Las Vegas, LookX. Now, what that does, you probably know at OMA, Rem flipped around the term OMA, and you got AMO, which is the kind of research branding branch of OMA, and that's what they do. They took XCool and they flipped it round and they turned it into LookX. Now, this is really this is what is going to change. This is one of the early things. I mentioned that I showed you that this person does not exist. This was what they did. In 2016 they started. This building does not exist. Of course, this is just superficial. It's just two-dimensional, but something new is happening. Those of you who've tried LookX will know that it's a quite a sophisticated thing right now. They've also developed their own diffusion model, which has been trained on architecture as opposed to the generic models like DALI and Midjourney, which are not trained on architecture. So they have this one, and I don't know if you've seen that the Frank Gehry, the Simpsons episode where Madge Simpson writes to Frank Gehry and says, "Dear Frank Gehry, could you design an opera house for us in Springfield?" And he kind of screws up this letter, humbug, and throws it onto the floor, and then he sees this crumpled bit of paper and said, Frank Gehry, you're a genius. And they built this crumpled bit of paper. So anyway, this is a crumpled bit of paper that Tim Fu, he used to work for Zaha, then used LookX, and you can interpret it through the lens of Gehry or Morphosis or Zaha, whatever. And this is pretty significant. It kind of means that renderers are out of a job, right? But it's pretty significant because it's a starting point of a process that is far more significant. Now, what we're going to see in 2 to 3 years' time is some software that's being launched that's not available yet, and no one's saying anything about what it can do. But I know, because I've been working with Vanu, it is going to transform everything. Now, what you're seeing here is one of the tools they're going to incorporate in that. This is a form of it's based on wind comfort. It's actually also topological optimization. And you're looking at how the rectilinear form is being eroded, as it were, by this process. And what comes out as the result of this is actually less rectilinear and more kind of Frank Gehry-like forms. Anyway, this was for a competition where they won against 200 architects. And I think the point is that you can't compete with some of these things. They're going to take over. They've beaten MVRDV. They've beaten Snøhetta. They've beaten many people in these competitions. And this is going to be, in some sense, a glimpse of the future itself. But what's going to happen is that they're going to put this onto a single platform. Now, at the moment, if you work for Zaha, you might be brainstorming ideas with Midjourney, then you go into Maya, then you go into Rhino, then you go into BIM. That's going to be on one single platform. And it's going to be a platform that's going to have incorporated into it a kind of cost constraints. You're going to be able to monitor exactly what it's costing. It will have all the building constraints, all the planning, all the code, local code, all written into it. So you can't step outside that. Whatever you do has to conform in some way. It'll have structural, environmental, acoustic, performance concerns written into it. It will be a platform that will do it all. And that is what's going to transform architecture, not these diffusion models of the past. And it's also going to go from data to fabrication. Now, the plan at the end is that they're going to use prefabricated modular components to fabricate these buildings, and that might seem simplistic, but if you think about it, I mean, like a Lego block, right? But Lego blocks are based on bricks, and bricks have given us an incredible array of architecture. I was thinking about this the other day on one of my flights, and I texted them and said, I think I know what you guys should be doing. You should be, because we all live in every architecture design building is different, right? Which is kind of absurd in some way. But we all have our laptops or our iPhones or things that are kind of mass produced. And we all have our mass-produced designer items. I mean, I've got a Philippe Stark lemon squeeze that doesn't work very well, but I've got one. I've got an Aldo Rossi espresso maker, right? We have these designer objects, but they're mass-produced, but we're operating in a single home, in a completely individual designed home. In the future, I'm convinced that we're going to have a kind of big or a Zaha designed home that is a bit like a box of Lego, right? And it, of course, way more sophisticated than Lego, and we're going to have that. In fact, I think it should be big, because big are based in Denmark, Lego is based in Denmark, and IKEA, which is the other model, is based in Sweden. That is what's going to happen. They're going to provide these prefabricated modular items, and we're going to go from data to fabrication. It's going to be a revolution. But in about 2 or 3 years' time, we don't know exactly. We don't know exactly when the self-driving car will work. We know it eventually will work. It's going to be a bit like that. But these things are in the production. And of course, no one's talking about it. It's all under non-disclosure agreements. You don't want to tell your rivals what you're going to do. Anyway, now, I don't want to talk too much about this, but I would say that we have got to pay attention to this, because it will have an impact on jobs. I saw something in Design a while back, and someone said, don't worry, AI won't affect jobs. I wrote to them and said, what are you talking about? Of course it's going to affect jobs. And then I wrote this piece. Actually, I co-wrote it with ChatGPT, and it was a little terrifying. When you're with ChatGPT, if you ask it, is it going to take jobs away? It's programmed to be very nice and say, no, don't worry. if you just ask ChatGPT, come on, ChatGPT, give me the real answer, it will give you the real answer. And the real answer is a little bit terrifying. Let me just mention briefly, I'm not going to talk about this today too much, but just to say the two reasons are, firstly, this one, in a sense, we all thought that the first people to go would be the blue collar workers. We'd seen these Tesla factories, not a single person in sight. And we thought, well, it's the blue collar workers. The white collar workers will be fine. But actually, it's the opposite. If you take a robot and take it out of the controlled environment of this, it will struggle. If I dumped a bunch of Lego bricks on a table and asked it to assemble a wall, it would struggle. It's got no more dexterity than a 12-month-old kid. Really, it's still struggling to do certain things. Meanwhile, AI is racing ahead. It's absolutely racing ahead. Now, what's happening then is that it's actually the white-collar workers. It can write code. It can translate. It can, and I want to argue, it can design. They're the ones who are going to basically, we're the ones who are going to suffer. In fact, if you look at the way they're using robotics right now in a kind of Amazon factory, they basically, it's all on robotic kind of platforms. They bring the material to the human being who does the stacking, because robots can't stack very well. That's all we can do is stack things. It's the blue collar workers who actually, ironically, will be fine. But even the computer scientists are going to be out of a job soon, or many of them, because it can write code. I'd always told my architecture students, don't worry if things get bad, just become an AI expert, go into computer science. Well, there's no safe haven there either. And let me point out another thing, and that is that this is a very significant graph. It's from a Harvard journal that points out that when you use AI, you can produce much better work. The quality improvement is quite significant between those who use AI and those who don't use AI. But there's another side of that. That is to say, what you can achieve using AI in terms of quantity is hugely different. I heard from one who once let slip, she said, one person using AI can achieve as much as 5 people not using AI. Well, it depends on the task, right? Architecture is full of different sort of tasks, and it can do some things very, very well. Rendering, forget it. Renderers are out of a job now. But it really depends on the task itself. But the point is, it can do that. I've got a friend in LA where I'm based, Guvench Ozol, who teaches at UCLA. He's got a 4-person company, and they are using AI, and they're competing against all the big guys and winning competitions with 4 people. Now, what's the danger in that? The danger is effectively that if one company, 4 people, can achieve so much, they can say, oh, I can do this for you I can drop the fees. Instead of 5%, we can do 2%. Well, that is a little worrying because basically there's only a certain amount of money coming into the profession. It's based on a percentage of the building costs. And if you reduce the fees from 5 to 2%, that's 40% of it's 40% of the original amount coming into the profession. Architecture is going to be starved of funds. People are not going to want to do architecture. In China, they already have fees at 2%, and nobody wants to do architecture. They're going into other disciplines. They're going into design, maybe, but not architecture. So architecture could be devalued. That's the worry about this whole thing. So what I always say, just in terms of the AI and the RIBA, what we need to design right now is not another building, but the very future of our profession. So I want to finish off by terrifying you, okay? And I think, what we don't pay attention to in the world of architecture is that what's going on aside. Now, I just want to use an example to show what this deep learning revolution has done and why we need to be paying attention to it. So let's go back in time to 1997. Now, Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, had predicted that by the year 2000, the world's chess champion will be beaten by AI. And actually it happened in 1997. Garry Kasparov, one of the greatest ever chess players, was beaten by IBM's Deep Blue. Now, nobody predicted this. They were all saying, oh no, Garry Kasparov, he could never be beaten by AI. This happened over and over again. When I wrote an article for the Zine, that article co-written with ChatGPT, half the response was, yes, those who work with AI said, yes, of course, we knew this. And then the other half was this kind of bunch of really pompous people saying, oh, there's not a single AI in the market that could possibly match my ingenuity and creativity. Well, that person will be the first to go. It is very, very significant. Do not underestimate AI. Anyway, after the match, Garry Kasparov came up with this comment. We just have to understand that everything that we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us, which is absolutely true, although there are different things at different stages. And clearly chess, forget it. AI can beat us. But for Garry Kasparov, this was actually a triumph for human beings because we had made the AI. Anyway, the real challenge that came in 2016 when they moved to the game of Go. Now, I never played Go, but I'm sure some of you have, and it's kind of straightforward in terms of the moves. But it is infinitely complicated in terms of the potential moves because there are more potential moves in Go than there are atoms in the universe. That means that, you literally, in a situation, you couldn't, if you put all the computers in the world together, you could not deal with the challenges of Go. So what they had to do was move from the old-fashioned expert systems, the pre-deep learning systems that they used for Garry Kasparov in the game of chess, to deep learning systems. And this was astonishing. This was probably one of the crucial watershed moments in the history of Go, this match. It was between AlphaGo, a system developed by DeepMind in London, Demis Hassabis, another British mind, incredibly at the forefront, also from Cambridge, who was the CEO there, took on Lisa Dahl, who was, again, the kind of Garry Kasparov of Go, and nobody thought he was going to lose. No way. Lisa Dahl, no way. But it didn't turn out quite as people had expected. This is a comment he made after game 2. Yesterday, after game 1, I was surprised, but today I am speechless. Now, what he's referring to was a particular move in game 2. Now, there was a series of moves in this match. There were 5 games in the match. And these moves are referred to as slack moves because nobody realized what the significance of these moves were. They thought they were maybe computer glitches or mistakes or something. Nobody could understand them. And this particular one, which has gone down in history, is almost the single most important moment in the whole history of AI, was this move 37, where AlphaGo put this stone here on the 5th line, which is unusual because normally it's the 4th line or the 3rd line early on in a match. And they put it on the 5th line. And it was a move that had never been played before. Everybody thought it was a mistake. It's the computer to make another glitch. Of course, Lisa Dahl's going to win. The computer makes mistakes the whole time. But 100 moves later, these 2 black stones joined up with this stone here, and it won the match. It's as though AlphaGo had been thinking 100 moves ahead. And of course, human Go players just think kind of intuitively, pretty much one move at a time. Now, that was kind of very significant. This, in the Go playing nations, was a kind of what they call it the Sputnik moment, when they woke up and thought, oh my God, look what AI can do. Mm-hmm. Kai-Fu Lee calls it a Sputnik moment because in 1957, I think it was, the Soviets launched Sputnik, and the Americans realized they were way behind in the space race, and that led to the foundation of NASA. Well, the second Sputnik moment, all the Go playing nations realized, oh my God, this thing is incredible. And the Chinese invested enormous amounts. They're way behind, but invested enormous amounts with the idea of overtaking the States by the year 2030. I don't think it's going to happen, but never mind. Now, this is kind of indicative. I'm going to play you a brief snippet of the commentators and what they thought about the move. They thought it was a mistake. So let's just hear what they say.
From the Google team was talking about is this kind of evaluation value.
That's a very surprising move.
I thought it was a mistake.
But it was no mistake. It was no mistake. After the match, Lisa Dahl made this comment. AlphaGo showed us that moves humans may have thought were creative were actually conventional. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that humans are creative in the first place, but I think the true significance of this is the fact that AI operates at a level we cannot understand. Those of you who've got dogs know, or even those who haven't got dogs, know that dogs have a range of smell and hearing way beyond human beings. They can smell and detect smells and sounds that we don't even notice. And that's what's happening with AI. AI is able to operate at a range we don't even know about. The dumb, they say, do not know how dumb they are. And even the intelligent don't know how dumb they are. We are insignificant compared to what's happening. But if you think that was a kind of significant thing, the next moment, which is not so well publicized, but actually was the really important one, the development of AlphaGo Zero, the next model in the series, this was the one that really transformed things. AlphaGo Zero played against AlphaGo and won 100 games to 0. It was clearly superior, but that wasn't the issue. The point is, it taught itself to play Go without being taught the rules of Go, without being given the rules of Go. It taught itself to play Go without being given the rules of Go. And that, you think, well, how the hell does that happen? You somehow reverse engineer the rules. But that was extraordinary as well. But the almost more astonishing thing was the fact that it taught itself to play Go by playing these games through a term called reinforcement learning, a technique called reinforcement learning. And it did it by playing 3.9 million games of Go over 3 days. And you think, 3.9 million games of Go over 3 days, that sounds like a lot. But when you think about it, it really is a lot. 3.9 million games of Go over 3 days amounts to 20 games of Go per second. 20 games of Go per second. Now, this is a hummingbird, right? We have lots of these in California. Admittedly, it's a slowed up video, but you can see that the hummingbird is beating its wings at roughly 3 beats per second. What would 7 times that be? It's just incomprehensible. Now, what I would argue is that this gave us a clue as to what GPT would do later on. It taught itself to play Go without knowing the rules of Go, and it could do it at a rate that was just astonishing. So the next thing, of course, was this. Now, we focus on DALL-E, Midjourney, ChatGPT, but it's the GPT that we need to pay attention to. Now, what's interesting about the GPT is one of these what we call large language models. Now, you could read that and say, that sounds really boring. I don't care. I'm more interested in the sexy images I can do with Midjourney. But large language models is where it is at, right? And they're not just large, they're absolutely gigantic. They're enormous. They're huge. What you're getting is these massive pre-trained models based on trillions of bits, billions of parameters. And what is so interesting about them is that actually the code itself is relatively straightforward, just 200 lines of code, but it is the size of the multi-agent system of these large language models, the sheer quantity of data that gives them what are called emergent capabilities. They start to learn languages. They start to translate languages. They start to write code. These are the things that we were really surprised about, and they're doing things much better than we ever imagined. And that is why people are getting so terrified. So you've probably read all this, the Manchester Guardian, right? This letter that was published by the Future of Life Institute, calling for a halt of the development of these large language models. That's what they were saying. These large language models with their emergent capabilities, we have got to stop this because it's getting out of hand. And everyone signed it, including Elon Musk. No chance, of course, that it's going to work. I mean, it's a bit like asking the leaders in the London Marathon to slow down. You're not going to slow down because your competitors are going to catch up. There's no way it's going to work. And in any case, how do you police this? If you can't stop Putin invading Ukraine, how are you going to stop him? Whatever. Anyway, never mind. Then Geoffrey Hinton quits Google. He'd been working for Google, and if you work for Google, you can't say anything what you're doing. So he quits Google to let the world know why he's terrified. Yoshio Bengio, one of his team from Toronto, and also referred to the Godfather. I mean, it's really Geoffrey Hinton's the Godfather, right? But anyway, it also looks completely, everyone's kind of lost because these things are doing things that are scary, way beyond what we predicted, just astonishing. And of course, the general public is beginning to wake up as well, especially in Hollywood, but not architects. Architects are kind of complete ostriches with their head in the sand. But the general public's been to wake up the fact that this is something that is pretty astonishing. So I want to, and Yuval Harari, I think, picks up on this. It's learned to write. ChatGPT has learned to write. Stephen Wolfram, also from the UK, points out, well, if he's learned to write, it probably suggests that actually human composition of sentences is quite straightforward. And actually, what ChatGPT, all it does is predict the next word in the sentence. But all of a sudden, you have all this stuff coming out that, of course, is going to get better and better as the next model comes out. But he makes the comment that AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization. It has learned how to write. And if you can write, you have enormous power because you can persuade people to do things. This is Yuval Harari's point of view, and he's absolutely correct. I don't think he goes far enough. Of course, it's learned to write. Of course, it's learned to translate languages. Of course, it's learned to write code. It's also learned to design. And this is why we as architects need to pay attention. So I'm sure many of you have been using Midjourney. This is Midjourney 5.2. And I don't know, my prompts are enormous. They're like 70 words long. They're full of references to the lighting conditions, to the rendering, to the hyper-realistic detail, and so on and so on and so on. But actually, the words used to describe the architecture are really minimal, really minimal. In this particular case, it was simply ultra-contemporary minimalist house in the Austrian Alps. That's all it was. Ultra-contemporary minimalist house in the Austrian Alps. I didn't say what it had to look like. I didn't describe the interior. I didn't say anything about that. It was all designed by Midjourney. I didn't say anything about the mountains in the background or the valley. I didn't mention anything about that. I said Austrian Alps. That was designed and laid out by Midjourney. It's also a landscape architect, right? And I didn't say anything about the boulder or the grass in the foreground. This was all done by Midjourney. My contention is basically that Midjourney AI has learned the rules of composition. It's learned how to design. Or this one, I simply mentioned a kind of specified ultra contemporary minimalist stainless steel kitchen. I didn't make any reference to the painting in the background, which is kind of nice painting. And I made no reference to this bush outside here, or these taps here, or the coffee maker. None of this. It was all done by Midjourney. And it has a sense of tectonics, how you put together materials. And of course, it's incredibly good at reflections. This was all done by Midjourney. Or indeed this. I mean, I don't know how long it would take for a human to render this, but this was done in 3 seconds by Midjourney, which is pretty astonishing. So let's go back to Geoffrey Hinton, the guy who didn't do architecture, who went into the world of computer science, who gave us neural networks, gave us deep learning. He is the godfather. He is the one who gave us all of this. And his very early ImageNet recognition system, image recognition system, set the path in motion for image generation. So this is Geoffrey Hinton telling us why he is scared about AI.
It made me realize that these digital intelligences have something we don't have that makes them much better. When one of them knows something, it can tell all the others. That's what we don't have with people. So imagine you had 10,000 people, and imagine if when one person learned something, everybody knew it. You could learn a lot more stuff, right? And that's why things like ChatGPT knows like 10,000 times as much as any one person. It's because when you train it, there's lots of different copies looking at different bits of the data and learning stuff, and they can all combine what they learn instantly with a bandwidth of like trillions of bits.
So can they think?
Yes. So imagine the following scenario. I'm talking to chatbot, and we talk for a bit, and the answers it's given me seem a bit strange to me, and I suddenly realize that it thinks I'm a teenage girl. And I say, what demographic do you think I am? And it says it thinks I'm a teenage girl. So the question is, when I said I suddenly realized it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was that a metaphorical use of the word think, or is that just the same way as we use think? And I strongly believe that use of the word think, when I said it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was exactly the same way of using think as we do with people.
And so that was enough to make you say, what, this has accelerated beyond my comfort level?
I suddenly realized maybe they already are better, and making them more like real neural nets isn't the point. They're already better than us. They're a better way of doing learning. And if we make them bigger, they'll get much smarter than us. They already know more than any one person.
I understand that things could go awry, but I still think that people hear the notion of danger and they dismiss it as hyperbole.
I thought it was hyperbole for a long time because I thought these things were a long way off. I thought there will eventually be danger, but I thought focusing on it now is unnecessary because it'll be 30 to 50 years before these things get more intelligent than us. But this combination of realizing that they might have a much better way of learning than we have, because they can share knowledge instantly, and seeing things like ChatGPT or Palm at Google that can explain why a joke is funny, made me realize these things are already pretty intelligent, and if they've got a better form of intelligence than ours, then it gets to be much more urgent.
So just to clarify, when he says Palm, Google's version of ChatGPT, could explain a joke, the point is, if it could explain a joke, you had to understand a joke, and that was kind of significant. So the Hinton's position is basically AI has a form of intelligence that is not the same as human intelligence, human intelligence, but infinitely superior. It is way, way beyond us. What's more, it learns so quickly, we will never, ever catch up. We're not talking about Moore's law. We're talking about a kind of an absolute instantaneous explosion. It's really a little bit terrifying. So I completely agree with him there. The one area I don't necessarily agree with him is whether it can think. In my book, we all thought that I wrote, AI has got no more capacity to think than a pocket calculator has. But now it's developing certain cognitive abilities. I think we have to use a think in inverted commas. I don't think it thinks the same way as we do. It certainly hasn't got the same form of intelligence. And that's really why I think that the term alien intelligence is such an important one. So let me just move on to Yuval Harari, who's going to terrify you even more, okay? So Yuval Harari, I think he's right, okay.
This is the end of human history, the end of human-dominated history. History will continue with somebody else in control. In 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new ideas independently. Maybe they'll be nice. Maybe they'll solve cancer and climate change, but we are not sure. I'm tending to think of it more in terms of really an alien invasion, an alien fleet of spaceships coming from planet Zircon or whatever with highly intelligent beings. This is what we are facing, except that the aliens are not coming in spaceships from planet Zircon, they're coming from the laboratory. If the humans are divided among themselves and are in an arms race, then it becomes almost impossible to contain this alien intelligence.
I think he's spot on, absolutely spot on. I don't suppose you read my book, and I made reference to alien, but I really think that term alien intelligence is a good one because it stops you anthropomorphizing this other form of intelligence. But we've got to recognize, we saw it, AlphaGo Zero. It learnt without being given the rules to go. Not surprising, it's learnt to write code. The question is, what else has it learned? What else has it learned? So I've just been in Poland, and which the country, Warsaw, the country from which Nicholas Copernicus came. Nicholas Copernicus taught us that basically the Earth is not the center of the universe, rather that the Earth rotates around the sun. Now, I think the second Copernican revolution, I'm not the only one who's been saying this. I said it about 3 years ago, but 3 or 4 years ago, but other people are saying the same thing. What we're facing now is the second Copernican revolution. We have got to realize that we are not the center of intelligence in the universe. And our problem has been looking down at AI and saying, oh, it's not conscious, it's not as good as us yet, right? That's a mistake. What if you took the position of AI and looked at us? I mean, from an AI perspective, we are incredibly dumb. If even ChatGPT knows 10,000 more than one person, the writing is on the wall and we need to face that. So let me finish off again in a slightly British vein. This was something I was brought up with, right? Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was a radio show. It became two movies. It became a book and so on. This was a cult thing. And you might have recalled, those of you who know this book might recall a moment in the story where they set up this supercomputer called Deep Thought, and they asked Deep Thought for the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And eventually, it takes 10 million years, but it comes up with the answer, and we all know the answer is 42. Then they think, well, what is the question then if the answer's 42? And then it takes another 9 million years, and I don't think actually, but the answer was going to be, the question was going to be 6 times 8, and of course 6 times 8 is not 42. No, okay. But the point is this, and this for Elon Musk is his favorite book. It's a book about philosophy. He points out you've got to ask the right question in order to get the right answer. Tom Main of Morphosis says the same thing about architecture. In order to come up with a good design, you've got to ask the right questions. So here we have a giant supercomputer, a large language model, shall we say, that takes 10 million years to come up with the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I'm convinced that GPT has also worked that one out. You know, it's worked everything else out. It's just seen all the data, and it's worked out all the connections. It's worked how to speak languages. It can write code. I'm sure it knows the answer to life, the universe, and everything, the kind of cultural genome, as it were, of human beings. The only difference is that it took Deep Thought 10 million years, and it takes ChatGPT 3 seconds. So don't panic. This, of course, is the words on the back cover of the Hitchhiker's Guide. I want to finish off, though, with another British commentator, Arthur C. Clarke, who is astonishing. This guy's amazing, right? He wrote this, or he said this in 1964. It's as though he is talking about 2023, exactly the kind of comments that Geoffrey Hinton's coming up with today. So let's hear Arthur C. Clarke.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons. But this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
I think what I would just simply say is that, of course, we've got to be realistic. We've got to recognize the world is not going to be the same. Mustafa Suleiman, another Brit who wrote this book, The Coming Wave, points out that we will not have so much work in the future. We won't have that. And we can't constitute our identity by saying we're an architect or a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, just take medicine, for example. How is a doctor going to compete with AI that's got access to all the medical records there ever been? Of course, that person can't compete, and we need to accept that. We need to adapt, and we need to find different ways of operating, but that's precisely what human beings are really good at. Andy Clark, another commentator from the UK, makes the comment in The Natural Born Cyborgs that we have infinitely plastic minds, we can adapt to all sorts of things, and we will. The world will change, we will adapt to it. We will almost forget about the world of the past, just as we've almost forgotten about the fact they used to have fax machines and so on. We will adapt, we will survive, and we'll find alternative ways of operating. So to finish off with another British comment, keep calm and carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Exciting and terrifying at the same time. I'm going to open a quick, just to see if there's some questions. If you don't mind, if you have just about 5 minutes.
No, I do. And I'm apologies for overrunning. I didn't realize quite how much material I had. Anyway, whatever. But,
let me just see if there's any questions on while we're waiting for if there's any question. I think I'm going to sort of kind of a zoom out. Oh, there's one. I'll await mine. Yasha says, do you think hybrid humans would exist in the future, where the human brain is replaced by AI? If so, how far do you think that in future is?
Well, I don't think it'll be replaced, but certainly will be enhanced by AI. I mean, this is a comment that Mustafa Suleiman makes, because he's got a company developing your own personal digital twin. In other words, there's something out there that, I mean, frankly, it would help me answer this question, right? I mean, there's something out there that would enhance my capacity to do anything. And that, I think, is the point. We've made the mistake of saying, is it humans versus AI? It's not. It's humans using AI versus those who are not using AI. And I think it gives us incredible powers. And I think that is more to the point. Of course, the danger is that eventually it will be able to suss out exactly what we're thinking and could potentially operate completely autonomously. At the moment, AI has no intentionality. It can't kind of decide things for itself, but that'll surely come. But it won't replace it. Oh, there's a lot of questions here. It won't replace us. It'll be, for the moment, it'll be augmenting us. And I think that's a comment that Elon Musk makes, is we are all cyborgs. Of course we're cyborgs, right? Already. And we are superhuman because we've got these enhanced powers, and that will be the case. So I don't know if we need to replace that, but I think the point is that unless we use this, we'll be left behind. That's absolutely clear. And I think in architectural terms, the first digital revolution happened when I was a student at Cambridge, and we had professors who were telling us to read Heidegger and are saying, no, don't use computers. Well, frankly, those who didn't use computers were completely unemployable. And in the future, we have to do this to keep up. And anybody who's in denial will be left out. There's a whole bunch of things here. I'll
read. You ready for the next one? There's quite a few.
Okay.
Elon Musk and PM Rishi Sunak recently had an interview discussion regarding the use of AI, whereby Musk envisioned a future whereby AI will at one point replace all jobs. How can architects navigate this transition to maintain stability and balance in their profession? What strategies or skills might be crucial for architects to adapt, and thrive in a landscape increasingly influenced by AI?
Yeah, good question.
This is James.
Well, what I would say is that, I mean, the what do you call it? The silver lining on the storm cloud, as it were, is if when you think through it, actually what these tools can do. I think in the end they'll be kind of spell check writ large. They will make sure we don't make mistakes. And what became clear to me as I was speculating about this was, especially the tool that LookX is developing, which is very basically for developers, but it allows anyone to become a developer because it does it all for you. And our problem as architects is that in the pecking order, there's the developer up there. We're down at the bottom, right? And even the structural engineers and the quantity surveyors get paid more than us. But technically, we could become developers. We could become developers because it's not going to be a big mystery anymore, and all the risk will be taken out of it. And in fact, apparently there was a study done that's saying actually the ones who really make the most money in terms of input per hour, whatever it was, are the people who sell the property. They're the ones who make the most. So we could even sell the property. So I think we could we could do that. And I think really the key thing though is to use that architectural imagination, that design imagination, to think through possibilities. So, and I don't mean buildings. I mean just using that imagination. For example, TED Talks were invented by a designer. Digital Futures was effectively invented by me, by a designer, right? I mean, so we could deploy that imagination and think outside the box. I think, first of all, that's become very clear is that in architecture, we have a number of marketable, redeployable skills, such as being able to design, think in 3 dimensions, understand material behavior, that nobody else has got. hence I discovered, one of my ADs that I did was about all these architects like Neri Oxman working for Iris van Herpen, 3D printing outfits. Well, she couldn't do it, but the architects could do it. And we being sort of been narrowly funneled down this line to you're going to design buildings. Well, the world has opened up. As Paolo Antonelli says, actually, architecture is part of a broader spectrum of design. How do we use that architectural imagination to open up in new ways and not necessarily think about making things, but to think about new opportunities? Like my best student at FIU is now, really brilliant student, is now operating in the metaverse, hosting conferences and whatever, So we have to use that imagination. And that doesn't mean copying other people, other architects and doing a Zaha type building. It means using that architectural imagination and thinking about it. Things will dry up. There will be so much up there, but we can still find an advantage if we're cunning about it. Let's get on to the next one.
Jake says, how do we stop young professionals and architecture students from using AI to automate design, as opposed to using it as a tool alongside human intuition?
Well, I'm not sure we can. This is always my gripe about Prince Charles, or now King Charles, is he used to take this kind of view about the kids today and the way they said that they're all a bunch of Beavis and Butthead distracted television viewers. They can't spell, they can't add up, they can't do this, they can't do that. Well, you don't need to spell when you've got spell check. You don't need to add up when you've got calculators. And what they can do is a bunch of other tasks or skills that are completely invisible to Charles, right? Multitasking and so on. And I think we have to move into a different domain whereby it's about the creative way in which you engage with these tools, not the tools versus us, but engaging with a creative way. With my students, and I find out because I haven't actually graded them yet, but I just got a bunch of things, submissions. There's no point in me asking them to write an essay, because they could write the perfect essay, right? Everyone could write the perfect essay with ChatGPT. But what I told them to do is produce a video and use as many forms of AI as possible to get across their meaning. And so actually last year I had some students using a kind of early version of ChatGPT, using Midjourney and using a voice synthesizer. So it was kind of David Attenborough reading out all this stuff. And it was pretty astonishing what they came up with, but we've got to really rethink what education is all about. I will just say this, and that is kind of like, I don't know how many professors in the audience, but we've got at least one with UP, is that actually education is the area where we need to really focus, because we're the ones preparing or helping to prepare these kids to go out into a world when the world is going to totally change. But it's the professors who are really at risk, because if you don't need so many architects, let's say you need half a number of architects, you have half the number of students. You have half the number of students, you have half the number of professors. But I also think when AI can do it all, we don't need 5 years to study architecture, we need 3. Put that together, and in the future, potentially, we only need 30% of the professors we have now. This is kind of scary. Plus, I would say, in order to teach some of this material that is really changing so rapidly, how can any one individual school do that? And that's where places like, online global platforms like Digital Futures come in, because there are only about 6 people in the world who know what's going on. You get those 6 people and you create a tutorial, which of course is out of date in 3 months' time. It doesn't matter. You have a tutorial and you share it. So the whole world of education is going to radically, or at least needs to change. Whether it does or not is another question. I don't know. I'm always cursing my compatriots for voting for Brexit. I think it was the worst idea possible, especially when I go through passport control in somewhere like Barcelona. I'm stuck in this stupid queue to go. But the point is this: we do things now that we don't need to do, like stamp a passport. How absurd is that? Stamping a bit of paper. It should be electronically tagged. We could do this thing for facial recognition. We could all be through in a few seconds. So there are things that persist, that carry on. But I think education really needs to really rethink its role and adjust it. I don't think that we should kind of go back to that question about the calculator. Do you ban calculators? No. Once they're there, use them creatively and absorb them as part of how we operate. So it's a question. Okay. Yeah.
No, sorry. I didn't want to interrupt. It's just you've just answered my zoomed out question.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It was about education.
Yeah. So no, I think so. The question is ultimately is just to go back to, I think that it's not replacing. It's kind of like it's how you creatively use this thing. So I don't know if you know the story about the mobile phone, right? But I mean, this was developed. They thought it was for rich businessmen, right? That was the thing, the developers. Then you can develop a tool, but you've got no clue about how people are going to use that tool. Actually, what happened is that the rich businessmen will give it to their daughters who are going out in the evening, and they'd say, give us a call when you want me to pick you up, and I'll come and pick you up. Now, all of a sudden, something opened up, and of course, more people using the tool, the cheaper it got, and so on and so on. The rest is history. And I think what's happening now with AI is the way that the really inventive people, when we put them on digital futures, they're just playing around with it and doing incredible things using control net and things to kind of control. There's a lot of things. So it's that really. How do you use the tool and how do you work with it? We're all cyborgs now. Let's not pretend we're not. And how do we use that our architectural imagination, especially, to use those tools in a creative way? What is your?
I'm going to probably connect the two next questions from Ahmad and Mohsen. First one says, what is your perception on how architectural education will change with the use of AI? And the second is, what are the potential uses of AI that are compatible with universities' guidelines?
Well, you can't police these things, right? I mean, even if there were some software, they say that they could produce software that could detect ChatGPT. Well, there'll be other software that'll be disguising it. And now that GPT can write other GPTs, it's impossible to police this. And in any case, how do you? I mean, going back to the question of Putin, if you can't stop Putin invading Ukraine, how can you stop Putin from cheating using ChatGPT or something? So I think the cat is out of the bag. We need to think more creatively about how we can work with these things. I mean, they're not going to do, okay, let's not be too terrified. Although I will say one thing, one of my students who I mentioned before, who produced all these, used AI to come up with all these questions, he asked AI, how do we deal with climate change? It came up and said, this version of ChatGPT said, well, let's face it, human beings are responsible for climate change. So we just eradicate human beings, we've solved the problem. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the right way forward. But no, I think that we have to be creative and think about these things, but not in denial. I mean, my experience of Cambridge, is to kind of like, oh, you shouldn't use these things in the studio. Well, that makes you unemployable, and I think really the challenge for education, and of course there was this apocryphal story in the past that Joseph Rickford once told me. He said there was a professor once, right? And when he was first teaching, he would pack out the auditorium, absolutely pack it out. And at the end of his career, there were like 6 people in the front row and that was it. And he said, I don't understand. I'm teaching exactly the same material I was 30 years ago. And in a sense, I've noticed this, that basically education, the people who studied Le Corbusier 30 years ago are still teaching the same stuff. Practice, I mean, looking at Foster and Partners or Zahidid Architects, they're the ones who are really adapting to the change because they have to. In fact, the companies I find most responsive have been the construction companies. I've been astonished by Turner Construction, the biggest construction company in the States, by Ferrovial, the biggest one in Europe, Spain. They are really taking this seriously. So education is a little bit behind, and I'm a little bit concerned that people are not paying attention to this. I mean, anyway.
Totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick note that Ray just actually answered that to consult the tutors, your tutors in the first instance, it will be different for each assignment, just as a response to use of AI. James, you mentioned
you mentioned Cool replacing, well, LookX is the English version, right? Replacing architects' hours on design optimization, adhering to building codes, which means we need to redefine what architecture is. Yes, absolutely. Do you think architects are going to become just design prompt writers in the future? Well, we're going to change. I mean, I think that there's already something. I mean, what I think is this, okay, is that it's kind of strange that an architectural theorist like myself is able to generate these designs. And I think what we're recognizing actually is the role of the discriminator is actually quite important. And it's not just me, people like Lev Manovich, who's the leading kind of art theorist, is now generating artwork again. And I think what we're discovering actually is that what you don't lose, what you need to produce good work on Midjourney or DALL-E or whatever, or LookX, is an eye. you have to have a good eye. If you haven't got a good eye, if you can't discriminate, if you can't tell what's good design, you will never produce good work. And I think the emphasis is going to be towards that, to being a kind of curator, critic, discriminator, whatever, with a good eye, controlling things. So I think that's a shift. And in a way, that's already happening, let's say, in the world of photography, right? You know, the old days, you take this kind of photograph, and it would take a professional photographer would set up a tripod and it'd take about an hour and a half, get it right, click the thing, and then the photograph will come out. Now we take a burst of shots, so sample shots, we look at them, we filter them, we edit them, and so on. So in a way, we're generating outcomes that we're then manipulating. And I think that's, in a way, what design itself is becoming increasingly a search mechanism, and you're taking that data and you're working with it. So I think we need a new vocabulary for what we're talking about. And I think it's searching, synthesizing, and so on. Okay, Ray's got to say goodbye. Thanks, Jake. One final comment about prompt writers, and I know everyone's going to go to their classes and things, but just to say, I prompt writing, we call it prompt engineering. It is not the exact science that you might think it is. And I discovered this when someone said, "Oh, do a house extension." So I put the word house extension to my prompt. And then I got all these British-looking buildings with gloomy weather. And I thought, what is going on here? Why these British buildings? Why are these gloomy weather? Well, I discovered that actually we Brits use the term house extension, but they don't do that in the States. They call it home improvement or something. It's only in the UK. So what happens is all this data is actually contextualized in a way we hadn't imagined. And it's useful in some ways, So I then tried, I was working with particular artists, and I was talking about buildings, but I was referring to an artist, and I referred to an Inuit artist from northern Canada. And I get this building and it's covered in snow. And I think, where's that coming from? So I now use an Australian Indigenous artist who's got a beautiful sense of color. I get Australian sunshine. I get the outback. I get gum trees and so on. It is really alchemy. It's not straightforward at all. And it's very, very difficult to control. So you need to be experienced in it. And it takes a long time to get there. And so we for sure need to adapt to survive, for sure. And I think that's the way that the production's happening. That's why I'm saying that what we need to do is not to design another building. We need to design the very future of our profession and our discipline. And unless we do, we're going to be like the dinosaurs, and we're going to be dying out. So that's the challenge. And the good ones, the smart ones, will do that. Like my friend Guven Chazal, 4-person practice, winning all these competitions. That's the way forward, not staying in the same path and dismissing this whole world, because it is changing. And we need to pay attention to Geoffrey Hinton, not to those pompous architectural commentators who are saying, don't worry. We have got to pay attention. Mustafa Suleiman, another Brit, look at his book on the coming wave. This is the world is just changing. It's not the chat GPT, it's not the DALL-E, it's not the Midjourney, it is the GPT, and the way that people like LookX are harnessing that and changing the future of architecture itself. We need to get on board, and those who do that will survive, those who don't will be left behind. And that's what ChatGPT told me when I said it. Come on, ChatGPT, give me the real answer. Okay.
Fantastic, as always. Your lectures are just phenomenal. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you for your time. Even you're, experiencing good weather there, which is
I'm going to go for a
lovely
swim.
to hear that. We feel very happy for you.
Yeah.
Enjoy. Thank you so much. This is an extremely important conversation, especially, for the future of education, that definitely needs a jump start, and and sort of kind of a different ways.
I would say a good kick up the backside is what I would say.
That's the expression. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Neil. It's,
sure.
and we need to have you, in 3D and color, at the MSA sometime soon.
Well, I come back to you. I'm going back for Christmas, right? And that's not a good time. But in May I'll be across, so maybe I could come up to Manchester.
Okay.
But look up Alan Turing and what he did in Manchester, and you can find out a lot of things about what happened.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'll speak to you soon. No,
okay.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you so much, Neil.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.